Well, let's hear from Jimmy Hepburn now. He, of course, is the Scottish Government's Minister for Independence, and he joins me live in the programme. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Martin.
We would win a referendum comprehensively. Would that be your prediction as well?
Absolutely. We are in the middle of building a compelling, progressive case for independence through the Building a New Scotland series of prospectus papers, and in any referendum, I would predict we'd win.
Papers which Humza Yousaf himself accepted that people just leave on the shelves and never read.
Well, of course, that was a reference to the first three that were published last year. You'll understand there was obviously a hiatus and interruption in the publication for the various reasons. Of course, we had a leadership election in the intervening period of time. We're engaged in that activity. We're publishing with regularity, and I do not think the ones we're publishing now will remain on the shelf. I think they'll be of great interest to people.
Really? I mean, let's go with
yes, winning. That's why you've got me on this one.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, and I've got you on to talk about actually this paper. But before I leave the point of winning referendums, there's absolutely nothing in any of the polls that backs up your assertion or the First Minister's, is there? Actually, if we stray briefly back to the real world, the polls suggest that you're not putting on any support, really, and haven't done for a long time.
Well, I operate in the real world, and in any referendum, there'd be a campaign, we would garner support, and I would believe we'd win.
How long did your team of civil servants spend working on this latest document, the citizenship document?
We've been working on it for a while, over the past number of months, in line with the other papers that we've been working on, in line with the fact that the 2021 election we secured a mandate to do so. We said at that election we'd take forward a programme to provide the people of Scotland, the information they required to make an informed choice in the future of Scotland. So in line with all the activity, these have been worked on over the last period of time.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a team of 20 civil servants, I think getting paid something like £1.4 million a year, and you've spent months working on a set of proposals that are almost completely identical to the plan that was drawn up 10 years ago in the white paper ahead of the 2014 referendum. What's the point in this? If nothing's changed, why all the fanfare? Why the expense? There's nothing in this paper, really, is there?
No, I think there's plenty in this paper. If you take the time to read the new paper that we published yesterday, Citizenship in Independent Scotland, we've set out the means by which people would be recognised as citizens in independent Scotland, and also, crucially, how people could become citizens of an independent...
But it's the same as last time. We already knew this.
Well, of course, it's not entirely the same as last time. In the intervening period of time, we've now got a UK government that's operating in an ever more hostile environment in terms of immigration to the UK. And what we've done is we've set out to be a more straightforward and fair process to become a citizen of this country, unlike the UK system where they profiteer out of citizenship applications. They cost around 3 times the value of processing them. That's not something we would seek to do, and we wouldn't put in place any equivalent of the life in the UK test. So we're also responding to the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Let's look at the plans then. You're saying, I'm looking at the foreword now of the paper, you're saying British and Irish citizens will continue to be able to move freely to live and work in Scotland exactly as they do now, and Scottish citizens will be able to do exactly the same in the UK and Ireland. You can't make that promise, can you? That's not in your gift, the common travel area. That would be negotiated after independence.
Well, I think anyone, I mean, even at the last referendum, I don't think anyone was seriously doubting that independent Scotland would remain part of a common travel area.
Doesn't matter, you don't know. It's the same with Brexit. Anything can happen in negotiations.
If you could let me finish, Martin. I mean, the Republic of Ireland's and the UK's common travel area has been in place for 100 years. Why on earth would the United Kingdom, the Republic of Ireland, not want Scotland to remain part of a common travel area? Let's be sensible about this. Of course, to be a common travel area, and Scotland be part of that.
We look forward to rejoining the EU when Scottish citizens will become EU citizens once again. When?
I look forward to that as well.
When? How long after independence?
Well, of course, that would be a process that would have to be done in the usual way. We'd need to apply, we'd need to engage with the European Union, we'd need to negotiate that. But given the fact that we're part of the European Union very successfully for over 40 years, there's no reason to doubt that we wouldn't be welcomed back.
Well, there might be. If we don't have our own currency or a central bank or use the euro, there's plenty of reason to doubt. So what's the plan there?
Well, of course, this is the 5th in a series of prospectus papers, and in the first one, we laid out our plans for currency. In the immediate term, we'd use sterling, and then we would create our own Scottish currency, the Scottish pound. So we've laid out that already. That's been very clear.
Did the First Minister not recently suggest, actually, we may even consider joining the euro if that's what it took?
Well, of course, there's criteria that we'd need to consider.
So it's the opposite of clear, isn't it, Mr Hepburn? We'd have our own currency, then at some unspecified point we'd use the Scottish pound unless we change to the euro. That's not clarity.
No, I think it's perfectly clear. In the immediate period after...
It isn't. There's three currencies in your answer.
In the immediate period after we become independent, we use the pound. And then when it's... there's this talk about when we do it. We do it at the time that it was optimal in terms of the interests of Scotland. We would do it at the sensible and appropriate time as soon as possible. We'd have an independent Scottish currency. We've laid that out in our paper already.
But we might join the euro.
I was unclear about that.
But we might join the euro. Is that your understanding of the position, your government's position as well?
Well, our position, as laid out in the paper that we've published, is that there would be an independent Scottish currency introduced at the appropriate juncture, introduced as soon as would make sense for Scotland to do that. That's the Scottish Government's position.
But we might join the euro.
Of course, we live in a democracy, and if that was a decision of the people of Scotland in the future, then that's one that they would have made. But we've laid out the government's position.
But we might join the euro.
I think I've just answered that question, Martin. That would be a matter for the people of Scotland.
In a referendum?
I've laid out the Scottish Government's position. We believe that there should be an independent Scottish currency.
Right. When are we going to see the European White Paper?
That'll be coming in due course. You'll appreciate, of course, that these are government publications and rightly were held to account by the Scottish Parliament, so they'll be the first to be informed.
This is all party political stuff, isn't it? Certainly, this most recent paper. Why should the taxpayer be paying for it?
Well, with respect, yes, of course, when we contest elections, we do it on the basis of it being a party political contest. But we stood on the platform of advancing this activity at the 2021 Scottish Parliament election, and we won that election, and it's perfectly legitimate for us to take forward that activity. Indeed, if you recall, just a few days ago on your very programme, Robert Hazel from University College of London at the Constitution Unit there and co-author of the UK Government's Cabinet Manual said it's perfectly proper for civil servants supporting the Scottish Government to work in this area. We've got a mandate to do so. Yeah,
but the First Minister said recently we need to increase political support to get a referendum, and you do that by making the case for independence. That's why this series of papers has been launched. It's about building political support for something that's beyond, at the moment, your government's competence. So if it's about building political support for your party's policy, why doesn't it come from your party's coffers?
Well, with respect, in no sense is it beyond our competence. I've just made the point that
getting a referendum is.
You've got a preeminent constitutional expert who has said that it's perfectly proper for civil servants working to the democratically elected Scottish Government to be undertaking this activity, and I don't see what's unclear about that.
Is it a good use of public funds then? If we accept that it's within your competence and it should come from taxpayers' funds, is it a good use of those taxpayers' funds, given that there is absolutely no sign of a referendum on the horizon in the near or middle distance?
Yes, I believe it is. And again, I go back to the fundamental point. We've got a mandate to do this. The people of Scotland have actually, through a democratic election, said that we should do this. We've laid that out in our manifesto, and we're taking forward our manifesto commitment. In that sense, yes, I believe it's a good utilisation of funds. And let's bear in mind the publication of each paper's roughly about £16,000 to actually publish a paper. That's a small fraction of the Scottish Government's budget. So yes, I do believe it's a good utilisation of funds.
Let's look at something very quickly and finally, Mr Hepburn. There is definitely a party matter. Fergus Ewing's comments on a podcast recently that there's a toxic atmosphere within your group at Holyrood, allied to suggestions, obviously, recently there's a toxic atmosphere within your group at Westminster. He says he's been ignored for more than a year by senior figures because he says your government's too close to the Greens. Is he right? Is there a toxic atmosphere at Holyrood?
Well, I've known Fergus Ewing for a long time. I've certainly not ignored them over the last year. I don't know if that means I don't qualify as a senior figure in the SNP. All I can say is that I don't agree with Fergus's assessment of the environment in which the Scottish National Party's parliamentary group is operating.
Who's the First Minister closer to politically, Fergus Ewing or Patrick Harvey?
That'd be a question for the First Minister.
No, who do you think he's closer to? You know his politics, you sit in Cabinet with him. Who is he closer aligned to, Patrick Harvey or Fergus Ewing?
Well, we have an agreement with the Scottish Green Party to serve in government with them. That was endorsed, incidentally, by around 90% of SNP members. We need to remember that agreement was put to the membership of the Scottish National Party, and they endorsed it. So we have that agreement, and we'll continue to work with them.
All right. Jimmy Hepburn, Minister for Independence, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.